This is going to be pretty fast-paced, talking about the day in the life of a public sector digital media user. And just to take you through the agenda for the next 45 minutes, and the timings are approximate, of course. We're just going to do a quick overview of the digital media landscape in government. We're going to talk a little bit about why users are valuable to our sales account executives and how to discover deeper opportunities through those users. And then we're going to dive into the personas, a couple of personas, a few that we have developed around our experience in the government sector to talk about who are some of the typical leaders and Adobe champions. Just a little bit on positioning tips when you're thinking about doing discovery, and also some case studies. We're just going to talk real quick about innovation at Adobe and what that means, how you can continue the value conversation with your customers by talking about Adobe's commitment to innovation. And that's a little long. I don't think the Q&A will be quite that long because this is a 45-minute session. So I'm so happy to have Lisa Watkins, our Government Solutions Consultant for the civilian team, to be presenting with me. Hello, Lisa.
I had unmuted, and I guess it unmuted me.
All right. Hey. So thanks for thanks for joining us. Glad to know that you're out there. And of course, again, this is Jerry Silverman, and I'm Senior Solutions Consultant in Government. So let's just take a couple minutes and talk about digital media in government as a big overview. And I think it's no mystery over the past year that enterprises and IT, specifically inside of the government, is becoming, or at least trying to become, much more customer-facing. And Forrester calls what's happening right now in enterprise IT the age of the customer, right? And our own CIO has called it the consumerization of IT, and that's a popular term. And so the focus is really shifting inside of government technology and digital government to systems of engagement, both with external constituents and also internally. And customer tooling and the agility that IT has in refining these tools that they provide either directly to constituents or to internal stakeholders, they have to start being much more agile. And so this is, from a predictions in cloud computing for 2014 from Forrester. And then, of course, Gartner comes back in and talks about exactly what I just said, with more focus on internal data and processes. Because as much of government IT has been focusing on external-facing and streamlining and making the engagement model for their external-facing customer portals better and more efficient, over the long term, focusing on the internal data and processes is going to be equally important. So we've seen this reflected over the course of this year, and again, this is not an exact figure, but we have done all of the agencies that you see here have done some level of enterprise term license agreement with Adobe in FY13, either with the Creative Cloud or with Acrobat. So I'd say the growth over the past 2 or 3 years in terms of the number of enterprise agreements, the size of the enterprise agreements, the scope, has really been on an upward curve because of those digital media trends that we were talking about. So just to break down quickly, how does an ETLA traditionally happen? And that's in quotation marks because really we've only been doing ETLAs for a year now. But how do enterprise deals typically tend to happen? You've got the account exec up at the top who's talking to the C-level or the VP or director level, and you've got the solutions consultant who is kind of driving from the bottom up. So you've got this top-down and bottom-up approach, solutions consultant talking to IT, to departments and users, and both of them are kind of addressing line of business type of users. And the deal is somewhere in between there. At least that's how it's supposed to be. A lot of what we've seen this year has been where the account exec and solutions consultant will meet with directors and C-levels and finance and IT to talk a lot about the Creative Cloud, but there's been not as much focus on down in the users and departmental folks in government and driving the value upwards towards the deal. There's been a lot of value driving downwards. And that typically tends to look like this. We'll pull a spend report. We'll pull an entitlement report, a licensing report. We'll see how many actual licenses they have, and we'll look at their deployments and look at their average spend. And we bring that into the discussion with the C-level or the VP level and talk about our new model and how with a subscription you get a more predictable spend and lower total cost of ownership, less risk for compliance, and deployment is made easier through the Creative Cloud. And usually the asterisk or the tag on to the end of that discussion is the new features, the tools, new tools, support and training services and roadmap and all that stuff. So it's usually tagged on at the end, and that's when the solutions consultant will come on in one of these meetings and say, hey, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, you've got a beautiful new offering with Creative Cloud, and here's the value of it. You can deploy it much easier. How is that value? In some circumstances it actually is, and that is a driver. But when you start getting into the deployment nitty-gritty and the details, it really, after a while, you just pull a face palm, and because that's such a small percentage of the total overall picture of what's happening in the digital media landscape. It's not the value of the tools, it's value of deployment and IT. Whereas, these end users that we're talking about and that myself and Lisa and that many of us know very well through our events and discussions, they're the ones who drive the demand for value. And as we all know in our experience with subscription licensing over time, the lifetime value of subscription always must increase, because as our end users, as our line of business, as IT has to support more devices, more platforms, more media types, and more complexity in their overall environment, including security concerns, accessibility concerns, if the end users can't realize the value of the software themselves, then they stop subscribing. And so I pulled up from our Goldmine portal a CC cancellation research document, and this is internal only to Adobe, that was from September of 2013. I found it really interesting that the top two cancellation drivers for subscriptions were cost and we don't need the software anymore. And those are basically the same thing. Because the IT and the VP level look at this software as a cost center that if there's no value realization, then they don't need the software. And so what we do to drive demand is we attend and present at various conferences and at trade shows, of course not as many this year with the government shutdown and sequestration. But we host Adobe Days, and we will do road shows and stuff like that to try and turn on the end users, to evangelize, to turn them from skeptics into believers of that value messaging. And it's not so hard to take CS6, compare it to CC, and look at the delta just in the amount of time that an end user will save per operation when they are using a 64-bit update to InDesign, right, in CC. They'll save 29 seconds a day, 300 operations a day. That turns into 40 days a year of saved productivity that they will have just by this one upgrade. And they become believers just by that. This is a picture I took at Adobe Max in the Creative Cloud room with all of these end users, seeing the light, no exaggeration. And they come back from Adobe Max or from one of our demand marketing events, and this is what they say to IT. This is what they're supposed to say. This is the message that they're supposed to drive up into the organization. And so that's one part of the value of users. I'm going to hand it over to Lisa to talk a little bit more specifically about what users can tell us, what we can learn from them. So go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks, Jerry. So now, we've kind of established a little bit of the backstory, and we kind of need to learn a little bit more about who users are and what a day in the life is for them. So when we kind of look at users in the government space, as many of you know, I was a government contractor for many years, so I was one of the end users within the government for our products. And the way that the government is sort of structured is maybe a little bit different than it is in some commercial entities, where you kind of have a mixture of people in different departments doing different roles. They may be siloed, they may be all incorporated, but you find that they are all over the organization and that they're all over departments within the organization. So maybe you have some people within the space within business operations, program offices, staff offices. The list kind of goes on and on. It's not necessarily just in a marketing department or a communications department. They could be spread and dispersed throughout the organization entirely. Then you also have individual contributors within the organization who may not be in a team or a group the way a traditional communications professional or design and development team may be. They may be working on their own individually as individual contributors. And what they do is just as diverse as where they could be. So instead of thinking of the silo of users in just these very rigid roles and rigid things that we might be accustomed to thinking of, like the graphic designers or the video professionals, audio professionals that are all in these types of creative multimedia spaces, we also have people within administrative roles, within knowledge working roles, within other sectors that use and heavily rely on our products, not just for documentation and not just for creative workspaces, but also for a lot of internal and external communications, for training, for scientific data research, for manipulating imagery and data for medical purposes. It's a lot of things that sometimes we forget about because we're very focused on just the creatives, but also keep in mind that everybody within the government space has something that they contribute, and they kind of all touch upon a lot of our software, whether they are people who are going to be recipients of communication and information from our software, or they're the people actually creating the content. So this is actually, I know it's really hard to read and it's really small, but throughout this list, basically, it's what we pulled off of some of our event descriptions where we looked at the people who are attending our events and what their job titles and what their job descriptions are. So, of course, we have a lot of multimedia, web, and design specialists within the mix, but we also have some titles that you might not always think of, like environmental scientists, attorneys, building officials. So these are types of users who have kind of unique and compelling use cases for the software. And sometimes we get a little sidetracked in focusing on all of the things where we can also drive value, not just with our core customers, but with expanding our lines of business the same way that our customers are expanding using our products. And of course, the type of materials that everybody is making is going to run the gamut from print to web design, from banners and billboards to all kinds of different forms, things that are all going to be in there. And all of our tools are the solutions for them to create all of these different assets and materials. So when you think of all of the things that everybody is creating, whether it be internal or external, whatever kind of media they're producing, we really do have a wide mix of projects, a wide mix of media, and a wide mix of people scattered throughout the organization. It makes it a little bit more challenging than some environments where you basically just go to the one department where everybody is the creative user and you say, okay, how many people are here, and you target that. It leads for a little bit more discovery and a little bit more creative thinking into who all is creating content and how can we help them create the types of content not only that they're making now, but that they might need to make in the future. Let's take a look at some of the creative professionals that we might find in the government space, some of the people that we might have to interact with that will be the drivers for value, that will be the real people that we can show the benefits of our software to, that'll drive and champion our software purchases up through the chain and throughout the organization. These are the people who are really driving and pushing the envelope for what they're creating in their agencies and what their agencies need to be creating moving forward. So we have three different personas that we're going to focus on for this. Our first one is going to be Daniel, who is a multimedia manager. Jacob, who's a visual information manager and analyst. And then we have Claire, who's a web developer and IT manager. So take a look at Daniel first. You know, he's the multimedia manager, so what is his particular role? So he oversees the content and subject matter expert team. And one thing that the government does a lot is it pulls in subject matter experts, kind of like you'd find in a training or e-learning organization, but throughout different aspects, through web development and design for content for the website, for content for brochures and print collateral. They have to work very closely with the subject matter experts, and they have to develop content based upon their interactions with those people. You know, he may have a communications background, a design background. He may actually have a background more in a subject field, depending upon the sensitivity of the data and the information that they're producing it for. It's not uncommon in government environments for them to assign somebody to develop content, not because of a design background, but because of a subject background. Say if it's a particularly sensitive or you need a secret type of clearance subject that they need to develop content for internally, a lot of times they'll develop content with people who aren't designers, but who have to learn our tools quickly and rapidly so that they can develop content because they're the subject matter experts. So where is Daniel found? Oh, there he is. He could be all over the organization. And again, the way that the government is dispersed, a lot of times you'll have many agencies, different agencies, and each of them will have similar department structures within them, or you'll have a big department within an agency that oversees a lot of different sub-agencies. It's a very varied mixture of how organizations plan and develop some of these aspects. So he could be in a sort of traditional PR type of department, or he could be in some sort of training field or in an IT or information area of the organization, or he could be in something totally different. So a lot of times we have to do our searching to find out where these people are and how their organizations are structured and how many people they might have in non-traditional departments working on these types of projects. So he's responsible for a lot of the branding, a lot of the production of materials, but because of the way they're dispersed, he also has to manage the resources, which means that he has to deal with budgeting. He has to deal with a lot of the more managerial aspects. And being a government customer, he's also working on our 508 compliance piece. So he has to sort of keep a foot in the door of all of those different aspects. He can be working with the design team. He could be working with the content creators. He could be making content himself sometimes. He'll be working with the IT departments on implementation and on contractors, as well as reporting up the chain of command, especially when a project that they're working on starts to get higher visibility. So think of a lot of times where government organizations are in the news or a project that they're doing is getting high visibility. chances are he's going to have to integrate a lot more with the upper level of commands when that starts to occur. And typical use cases, he's going to be all over the place. He is going to be working on things for different devices. He's going to be working on all aspects of media. He could be doing video one day, still photography the next day, some content for the web, anything and everything all day long, every single day. So it's never sort of he's just sitting in front of still photos in Photoshop all day. He's interacting with our entire light of suite, our entire product line at any point in any given day. So his pain points, here are the issues that he faces and the challenges that he faces. A lot of times, they want to start implementing something, but IT has concerns with deploying new software. They have concerns with the security of their systems. There may be some regulations, especially internally, onto having software approved or what they can do specifically. They may have older systems. They might not have a full software refresh, so they have to balance out when their software refresh and hardware refreshes are occurring. They may need new training for software that might not be in the budget, or they might only have a budget to send certain people to training or to get training online through a provider like Linda. And of course, to ensure all of the accessibility in Section 508 compliance for all of their materials can be very time consuming. So what do they care about? What are the features that we provide to them through our products that can matter, that we can showcase to them to drive value? Well, obviously, even though he's a multimedia manager, he's going to be working with a lot of documentation, a lot of PDFs, a lot of the accessibility features within Acrobat 11 will be very important to him. There are going to be features in all of the new CC products that we can highlight and showcase. These are just a few of the ones mentioned here that are very important, but these are the stories that we as solutions consultants can create and develop information about to really drive the value to them, to show them how their workflows, their processes, and our tools can really marry together successfully to ensure that they are more successful, more productive, that they're creating information and content that really meets their needs and their user needs in a much more efficient manner. And now Jerry's going to speak to us about Jacob, our Visual Information Manager.
Thanks, Lisa. Great job. And I can't tell you how many visual information managers and analysts and also multimedia managers like Lisa just mentioned I've come across at our events and in our time, concentrating on this market. So this particular person might be an attendee at our Act of Valor the event that we put on last year, because they're really about specialized hardware and software knowledge. They're deep into the world of digital imaging, motion graphics, analytics, capture, motion capture, and they're also very concerned about cataloging, tagging with metadata, archiving, and classifying the visual information that they use. This comprises a huge user segment, and you'll find them all over the place. This is really, on the right-hand side, this is really only some of the use cases, but the more prominent customers that we come across are in law enforcement and intelligence. They'll do forensic, analytic, investigative, and security jobs. They might be in combat camera or public affairs offices. They themselves may work in the digital asset management section of a particular organization. Don't let it deceive you. Even if they're photographers, they might actually work as digital asset managers, and that may be their title. And then, of course, tons of staff photographers, videographers, and our video expert on the public sector, Trip Gatelli, he could probably tell you all about these customers and some of the success stories that we've had with those particular elements there. So I definitely encourage you to talk to him. The visual information manager or analyst, they're typically responsible for anything related to photography or videography, including encoding, transcoding, exporting, getting the that particular media to where it needs to go. But they might also be responsible for analysis of those imagery. If you watch Homeland or Zero Dark 30 or any of these, what these analysts do is actually, portrayed in Hollywood, but there are actual roles where they use our tools to do detailed analysis. But they're also very responsible for getting the metadata right, for creating taxonomies and workflows around metadata that will allow their assets to be found where they need to be found, to allow them to be cataloged and retrieved and archived as appropriate. So a VIM or an analyst will work with all across the organization. Like Lisa said, sometimes there are aspects of the visual information role that goes across the government community into legal or scientific or academic different aspects of their job. They will often interact with imaging standards and regulatory bodies. There are some cases where an outdated file format that they'll need to unarchive, and they'll actually have to interface with Adobe directly to understand the specifications for that image. And they're very gearhead type of people, so you'll find them at NAB and CES and some of these other large trade shows, because they're hardware and software experts, and they like networking with them and other IT and IA folks. So again, we don't have to beat this to death. They have many typical use cases across the visual information spectrum, from putting together evidence for an investigation to basically analyzing or editing or compositing footage, to processing that footage and transcoding, getting it out and delivering it, and many more roles in between. And their pain points are not all that different than the multimedia manager we just talked about. Deployment is a huge concern. The government regulations around the usage of software is a constant, I would say, stumbling block in using the tools effectively and getting them deployed. A lot of them will see some of the innovations coming out of industries and companies like Adobe, but will not be able to trust them either for security reasons or for stability, perceived stability reasons of those solutions. And even when it comes to just having the correct version of software on their system to run projects from fellow collaborators, they'll run into constant problems. And then, of course, the learning curve for training is always high, and they're always needing enablement. So some of the features that matter around this particular segment is with all of the digital imaging tools, of course, camera shake and smart sharpen and upsampling, but many of the new features in Lightroom, the sheer existence of Prelude as a tool to do footage ingest and to create rough cuts is a huge bolster. Of course, being able to ingest a number of different file formats and work with them natively using the Mercury Playback Engine in Premiere is huge. But also the performance increases that we've seen from CS6 and CC in After Effects and many of the other tools as well. So this is just very high level, and many of them will branch into e-learning, assembling curricula or assembling learning materials for their fellow academics or their fellow analysts. And so that kind of bridges into what Claire does as well as the web developer and IT manager. So I'll kick it back over to Lisa to pick that up.
Thanks, Terry. So now we're on our third persona, who is Claire, our web developer IT manager. And one of the things that I hope you kind of see similar in all three of these personas is that all of these people kind of have these very fluid, hybrid types of positions. They're not necessarily the people that are sitting there cataloging images all day or coding all day. There are a lot of people within the government space that really are very fluid, and these are people that are great to address because they're the people who are going to get the most bang for the buck out of our encompassing suites out of more of our tools, out of utilizing more of them together in what they do. So Claire is kind of a Jill of all trades. She will be put onto special projects. She'll have recurring projects. She'll have a lot of things that she has to do kind of that come up for maybe something that happened recently in the news, maybe something that the agency is doing especially for that particular time frame, and then things that are ongoing throughout the year. You know, maybe she has more of a computer science, maybe more of a technical background, and she might have actually had a lot of experience with the commercial world before joining the government team. So sometimes there'll be a little bit of a disconnect in the way that the commercial world works, in how rapidly they're able to do things, and how the government world will work for where she is. She can, of course, be in a lot of different teams and groups, and sometimes these web development teams might have their own, say, department or office within an agency. So there might be an Office of Information Technology, or there might be a group like that. But sometimes there's an IT department within another department, like say they have a Office of Training and Development. And this is actually how Customs and DHS are structured, where the Office of Training and Development had their own separate group, and their Office of Information Technology had their own separate groups. So there's all these other subgroups within groups, and not necessarily a universal department within the organization. And she could be in any one of those departments or areas. She could be in an e-learning or training team organizationally, or within a sub-agency. She is mostly responsible for sort of vague types of information. So, you know, she's the person that's going to act as the glue and the gap and the bridge between everything else within the group. She's going to be working with everybody throughout the organization. Again, a lot of different subject matter experts, a lot of people who have the drivers for the content, who need the content to be communicated either internally or externally, and then we're going to kind of go on from that for what she does for putting that into intranet, extranet, and internet sites. So a lot of what she's going to be doing is going to be working with written content, documentation, document reviews. She's going to be going through prototypes and e-learning. You know, she could be going through a lot of text, a lot of images, a lot of multimedia, a lot of different types of assets that she has to interact with every day. And you'll kind of see that the pain points are, again, pretty much universal throughout any type of role through there. You're going to have the implementation through IT, you're going to have regulation, and you're going to have training as big drivers for what the solutions are going to be important, what solutions are going to be important to them. And again, on the product side, you know, she's going to benefit from a lot of the products in our full enterprise suite, but she may also appreciate some of the things that we have in our e-learning suite, some of the different products in there. So sometimes it's important to try and look for the e-learning products or for different types of products that we may have that may also be drivers for the people that we can upsell and add to the sale with these end users. Now, of course, any type of information that we're using with the users is what we really want to be focusing on at the discovery stage, because this is what allows us to really look organizationally at the users and what their drivers are, what we can bring to the table, and how we can upsell and promote different information. So we're not going to know all the internal projects that an organization may have going on. You know, there's going to be some stuff that's secret, that's internal only. But we can actually do a little bit of research, and we can look out at what they have at the public to give us a good baseline to work from. So here's some simple discovery questions and things we could do. This is, you know, some real-world examples of things that actually exist that, you know, we can find out about our clients and customers before we engage with them to form a good baseline for our conversation. So is their .gov site well designed? Is it responsive design? You know, if you use it on a mobile device or on a tablet, is it something that's designed well for those sort of things? Is there a lot of animation or activity on it? Do they seem to have a good sense of design and a good design department, or does it seem like it's been several years since they've updated it? Can you find out who does the design and development work. Are they contracting it out? Is it an on-site contractor, or do they actually have a department or team internally that's focused on it? Is there anybody inside the organization that you know? Can you look at the hierarchy of the org chart and sort of see, hey, I know some connections and have some connections with some of the people there, or some of my other customers may know people, and we can do introductions to our existing customers through other agencies. Do a little bit more research, finding out their strategic plan, looking at some of the reports and things that they have out. Look and see what those strategic plans are made with. Are they actually made with our software? Are they things that are well designed? Are they things that are actually put together and integrated well? Is that something maybe that they've been using an older version of our software and we can show them some new features because it's something that they need to be doing? On their website, are they using video? Are they using any kind of animations? And if so, what are they using? Is it Flash? If it's Flash, what version of Flash are they using? You know, a lot of this kind of discovery stuff we can just find out very easily by going on to public places that we all have access to. Are they leveraging social media? A lot of times you'll see government agencies in the news, whether that's a good news story or a bad news story. Something will happen that will be applicable to that agency. Are they responding to it through social media? Are they responding to it at all? Is there any kind of PR activity that we could look to leverage to push on that? What green initiatives are in place? You know, the government's always going to be focused on certain buzzwords. They're going to have the ability to have grants and different funding available once they start to take on different initiatives that are passed through whatever federal things. Like a green initiative right now may be something that we can focus on if they're doing that. And of course, you know, if they have any kind of regular PR or regular news things, that we're subscribing to their blogs, that we're subscribing to their feeds, that we're actually getting information from them so we can leverage that and use that in our sales activities. What kinds of things are they publishing? You know, if we look in iTunes, if we look on places where EPUBs are put, you know, are they putting anything out there into those things? Do they have any apps? If we look on app stores, Sandia Labs has their own app, their other applications that they could and should be doing based upon their line of business and what things are important to them. And what about their forms and business processes? If we look through, again, their website, if we're looking through a lot of their materials that they have, are they utilizing best practices? Are they utilizing some of the technology that we can provide to them, that we can showcase them to simplify their operations? For their training curricula and for their other things, are we seeing any gaps in design? Are we seeing areas where, okay, something might not have been designed or refreshed recently? Maybe this is something that we need to focus on. You know, maybe we can find particular departments or groups within their agencies that haven't updated yet, that aren't mobile ready, that aren't utilizing a lot of the more modern design practices, and work with to integrate those works to get them excited about our products, to make them really want to upgrade and really want to benefit from the features that they can gain from them. So those are all just some very, you know, basic types of questions that we can ask them, that we can look from, to get information from them immediately once we've gone off of just public information that we have access to. So when we look at some of the drivers for this, we are really seeing, you know, a couple of different value statements that we can lead with, that we can go in with. You know, our digital media products are mission critical to their agency because they touch 100% of their constituents. You know, this is something that we can lead in with because we can demonstrate how 100% of the constituents receive information from things that can be generated and created with our products. And we do play a strategic role in the enterprise because we impact every engagement between an agency and its constituents. But it's not just between the agency and the constituents, it's also internal. So, you know, we have internal data and processes, we have external data and processes. We can give them the whole big picture perspective of how our tools can integrate with all of their workflows, with all of their challenges, with things that they really need to do throughout there. So you've probably noticed throughout this presentation that we've been using these three different areas, these three different colors. It might not be 508 accessible to use colors to convey information, so hopefully nobody's colorblind on this. But these are the three key focus areas for 2014. And of course, it already is 2014 for us. So these are the areas that we need to be driving, right? Citizen and force engagement, enterprise process improvement, and training and mission readiness. And these are the areas where we can focus on each of those to ensure that we're really meeting those target areas in driving the value through the user base. So for citizen and force engagement, we can kind of look at not only the communication outreach, but how that communication outreach is going throughout multiple platforms, multiple devices, what kind of challenges that they're going to have in that engagement with external and internal users. Process improvement, especially in ways that we can reduce cost and reduce time in processes involving documentation, involving forms, and involving any kind of information like that. And training and mission readiness, enabling their training to be just-in-time, anywhere training that can be seen on any device at any time, with different types of connectivity demands, different types of security demands, and for different types of learners throughout their organization and external. And of course, where digital media fits within there in our 4M strategy is highly on the make and mobilize portion. But what we really see within the make and mobilize portion is how we can tailor the make and mobilize messaging to each of the workflows. So for each of those users we looked at, all of the users within an organization, once we understand their users, once we understand the content that they need to develop and what their pain points are a little bit more, we can actually tailor our messaging in our products and what we're going out and showing them and demonstrating to them either in calls or in Connect sessions or in Adobe Days or whatever types of meetings and events we're having with them, features for their different workflows. So these are some of the ways that we're doing this within the design and document space. Web and e-learning workflows, so this might be something of particular interest to Claire or even to Jacob or, what's our other fellow's name? The first fellow. So any of those people within the organization really can benefit from a lot of the knowledge of not only what their workflow is and processes, but how our tools address each stage of their workflow. So the design stage, the prototype stage, the deployment stage, and the maintenance stage. Each of those areas we have a solution for that we can craft a message around and a story around to show them what value our products have for that. And again, for the video and audio imaging workflows, there may be something slightly different that they do. There may be something a little bit challenging that they do. We understand where their pain points are. Maybe they have issues with the published portion of the workflow. And that's really where we start to focus in on driving the value to that. Now, we do have some materials that we can use to demonstrate value. We do have some talking points that we can go in and lead with, but we really need to be crafting messages around where the users are experiencing the greatest demand and where they're having the most issues with developing content and creating the content with their workflows. So this is a not too old productivity study. It's obviously back on the CS6 version. Sometimes in the government space, CS6 is what we're going to be bumping up to. But we can still demonstrate, even with the CC products, if that's what we're moving up to, that you start to look at the ROI with our tools and with the productivity gains that they're getting from our tools, and we can start to drive messaging around that as well. We have some more recent versions for Acrobat, so we can go off of that material for that and the gains that we get from those things. And from that, Jerry's going to talk a little bit about where we've seen some real successes in utilizing this strategy and approach.
Great, thanks, Lisa, and great job getting through all that material in such a small amount of time. I think we assumed that we had an hour, but the meeting was for 45 minutes. So whoever needs to drop off, they can, but this is basically the end with the success stories. And you know, one of the customers that we've engaged on one of our road shows is at the Naval Underwater Warfare Center, and they have this 4K visualization studio where they have integrated basically a cross-domain collaborative workflow like you see here to take them across a number of different studios and offices. And they use the Adobe Creative Cloud and Acrobat and pretty much every desktop tool that you saw on the previous slides to create videos, multimedia, responsive websites, digital publications, PDFs. I mean, they're really, you know, they are reminiscent of the defense media activity on a smaller and more distributed scale. But most of the materials that they create are seen throughout the military, at least throughout the Naval Marine Corps intranet. And their virtual studio environment, this is actually a diagram made by the customer themselves to show how across all of their domains, all of their workstations at over a dozen locations across North America, how contributions to their virtual studio are contributed to using the Adobe Digital Media tools. So that's one that we're actually working on creating a customer success video for, but there are a number of you know, customer success stories on the Adobe you know, customer showcase that are specific to government. There's ones about DPS, around Acrobat, actually quite a few about Acrobat. This was a new one that I came across, the renal data system, and that's a DPS case study, but again, you know, another government agency and customer. And then, of course, for the state and local market, the city of Sacramento and San Diego County, those are deals that we did in 2012 that are still very compelling to use in your Acrobat discussions. And there's another, there's an eLearning success story that I found around National Institutes of Health. So that's really interesting. Now, just as we wrap up, I wanted to talk about that messaging of innovation that we've been conveying in our meetings. You know, typically when we go through and talk about the roadmap, especially to our government customers for whom cloud solutions are still, you know, extremely problematic and working through. When we bring up this slide and we start talking about innovation, we'll get what's commonly known on the internet as a double facepalm, or it could be a multiple facepalm from a variety of different, you know, stakeholders inside of the meeting. And yes, we had a facepalm. As you can notice, we are a bit obsessed with Star Trek over here on the SE team. But the idea around maybe adjusting the pitch a little bit to not necessarily talk about the roadmap for our specific product, but talk about Adobe's drive towards innovation in general. To talk about how we've always had a focus on innovation, and as you can see from this list of patents, we continuously find ways to augment and streamline the creative process for our end users. And you know, for example, when the Digital Media BU was working with Wired Magazine and Condé Nast on creating the digital publishing suite, we found that there might be a better way to kind of collaboratively envision a publication's layout. And so this is how you know, a typical editorial team might be arranging articles in today's environment, but our product experience designers felt that there was a new approach that could improve collaboration in the real world. And so we got to work building Adobe Context, the goal of which is to make in-person collaboration and content reviews more effective through this kind of natural file sharing and direct access to content repositories and integration across a bunch of different larger screens and also smaller mobile screens. And so here you can see editors working together on 3 large work surfaces to kind of envision the layout of an upcoming publication. And this is one of a bunch of different examples of how Adobe approaches innovation so that the creative efforts of our customers can focus on impact and not on effort. So there's a link here in this deck that we'll distribute just to look at it a little bit more closely. But our product teams are also starting to focus, as we revealed at Adobe Max in May of this year, that we're focusing on innovation with Projects Mighty and Project Napoleon after seeing a need for tools to help our creative customers work on their tablets in ways that are more similar to traditional art tools with paper. So Mighty, which is the pen here, mightier than the sword, it's a pressure-sensitive stylus, which helps it draw kind of a more natural and expressive line. It can be connected to the Creative Cloud repository through software and a local Bluetooth connection. And we can use, customers can use this connection to pull up anything from the Creative Cloud, like cooler themes or typekit fonts, and put together a clipboard from the cloud, which gives them access to assets they have that they've saved to the cloud to reuse. And Napoleon over here is essentially a small ruler, right? Get it? Napoleon, small ruler, that works alongside Mighty. And it's a digital ruler, which is designed to bring back some of the feeling of drawing with analog tools like the T-square and the triangle. So in addition to making these great new products, Adobe's engineers are also working on new approaches to existing productions. So this is just a list on Adobe Research website that are underway or recently published in the academic community. And one particular project from the Adobe Research site involves engineers and scientists that worked together with engineers from Princeton University to computationally fill areas of images with pieces of the existing image. And this project is called Patch Match, as you can see, and the resulting feature in Photoshop is called Content-Aware Fill. So the science and the innovation behind this feature look like a complex formula, but to our digital media customer, all it looks like is a lot of time and effort saved. So that being said, if this were an hour presentation,